Hello again. Our Monday workshop this week was about fueling your winter training, and we had some interesting discussions, so I thought it'd probably be worth talking through the slides that Claire used to lead the workshop. Claire's also writing a blog, and I'll link to the blog below, but the blog's a little bit more general, but it includes some really useful information, so if you want to have a look at that on our website, then you might find that useful. So, fueling your winter training. Well, I know a few of you live in the southern hemisphere, and I guess you're going into the summer, but talking to one of the people on the workshop, he was saying it's still pretty cold. A number of things change in the winter, like we're wearing more clothes. The volume of training that you're doing might change. It may be that you're doing less, depending on what your main goals are. If you live in particularly inclement climates, then using what's known as a reverse polarization strategy, whereby you do some high intensity training in the winter and build up the volume as you get into the better weather, can work quite nicely. But in a more conventional training periodization, you'd be doing quite a lot of volume in the winter. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Of course, the intensity changes with the volume. The amount of racing that you do, the number of events that you do will change, and the type of events that you do might change. So even if you're doing a lot of training volume outdoors, you might be doing Zwift racing, or you might be doing cyclocross with a lower volume than you would normally do in the summer. Your rate of sweat and thirst, your sensations of when you should be eating and when you should be drinking all change when the weather's colder. Your motivation changes. I certainly find that if it's colder in the house, like at the moment it's pretty cold in here, I'm less inclined to go training. I guess it's probably because I don't want to take my clothes off and change into my cycling kit or my running kit. But I find that motivation can be different in different climates and different weather conditions. One of the people in the workshop lives in Norway, so he had a lot to contribute because he's obviously dealing with cold conditions than a lot of people, although perhaps some of you in the northern USA or Canada will be having some fairly cold conditions as well. The hours of sunlight, if you want to do super long training sessions, it can be quite difficult to get that done in daylight. Training in cold weather, particularly high intensity training or racing, can be quite damaging, and there's a lot of incidence of upper respiratory problems in winter sports athletes. Like a lot of cross-country skiers do have upper respiratory problems and are asthmatic. So you have to be a bit careful in very cold weather, and it's probably worth limiting the intensity when it's really cold, unless you actually have to work hard in very cold conditions. Another thing which seems to be a bit more of a myth than an old wives' tale type thing is that we burn more calories when it's cold. So Claire, look, these papers here, you can check them out if you want. So Claire did a bit of research around it, and it turns out that possibly you might burn a few more calories, but it's marginal. It's not a meaningful amount. So you don't really need to eat more when it's colder. One thing that is quite common, and something that I've come across quite often, is putting weight on during the winter. So why does that happen? We tend to eat more in the winter. I think it's probably comfort. A lot of people find it comforting to eat warm foods. Certainly I do. And as a consequence, you might eat a bit more calorie-dense food. And we relax more. We spend less time doing things because, well, it's dark, isn't it? So we're quite often inside, might be watching telly or doing more sedentary tasks because we're not outside taking advantage of daylight and warmer conditions. You know, in the summer you might go out for a bike ride at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening for a couple of hours, whereas you probably, unless it's actually specifically part of your training, you don't really want to be doing that in the winter. We often come into the winter off a bit of a break after a main competition or event season, and during that period you might put a bit of weight on because everybody wants to relax. You might have a few beers or a glass of wine or something like that, and as a consequence you start in your winter a bit heavier than you might want to, and you don't initially start doing a high volume of training. So it's not that surprising that you might be a bit heavier in the winter, but unfortunately being a bit heavier means you've probably got weight to lose. So you have to be a bit careful about how you do that, because you don't want to be in a heavy calorie deficit. You've still got to fuel your training, and you don't want to be trying to lose weight. If you say you want to start your winter with a big sort of strength phase, you need to eat enough, because it's very difficult to build muscle. Unless you're a beginner, it's very difficult to build muscle and lose weight at the same time. But irrespective of that, even a few kilos overweight is not going to make a huge difference to your performance. Being at a healthy weight is much more important than trying to achieve this magic race weight. And that's a healthy weight for you. And remember that weight can change over time because your muscle mass might go up, and you're really trying to maintain a healthy body composition rather than actual body weight. The logic of fueling training doesn't change. 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate for training sessions, sort of 90 minutes and above, and if you're going longer, then more. If you can train your gut to tolerate that, up to maybe 100 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Obviously, that's a pretty costly exercise if you're fueling at that level with gels and powders and nutrition products for all your long training sessions. If you're doing a high volume block, so just be sensible about it. You don't need to be training your gut all the time. You just need to do some sessions whereby you eat a lot of carbs so that you can do it when you need to do it. And the other sessions you just need to be, particularly if they're low intensity, you just need to be fueling enough to get through the training session and be not totally dead at the end of it. Obviously, what you eat and drink in the winter can be very different to what you eat and drink in the summer, because if you're on a bike, your water bottle could freeze. The liquid in your bottle could freeze, and therefore you can't drink from it. So you might need to maybe get a Camelback type system and put it under your jacket so that it's against your body. And of course that leads to the problem that the straw, the drinking straw, the liquid in the straw might freeze. But if you take a drink and then blow air back into it, then obviously it can't freeze because there's no liquid in it, and then stuff it inside your jacket. Then you've got a big that most of the liquid is in a big mass, so the straw shouldn't freeze, and you should then be able to maybe use it for longer. And the other thing that Joe mentioned is one of the things he does in Norway, because if it's minus 10 Celsius, then things are going to freeze quite quickly. He does loops, so he knows that if he puts hot liquid in his drinks bottle, it can last maybe about an hour. So he does an hour's loop and then goes in, gets a bit warmer, and then does another hour. And then of course in the winter, you might, if you're having more social events, there might be more risk of getting ill. So just make sure you keep up all your micronutrients on top of having a good macronutritional balance. And just make sure you're on top of all that. I'm not saying you should take supplements. It's quite dangerous to take some supplements like iron. You can have too much iron in your system, as I found out to my cost a few years ago, and I've had to have years of not being able to train properly due to fatigue, due to excess of iron in my system. So you don't want that. And you can also have excess of certain vitamins. So if you are going to take supplements, make sure that you need them, and if you don't need them, don't take them. And one thing Claire picked up on is this bullseye method for picking your ideal foods that she picked up from a book by Jason Coop on ultra-distance trail running. But of course it's applicable to cycling and running, as most of these things are. And the theory is that you have your main foods, your go-to foods that really work well, and they're your staples. But often it can be that you don't feel like eating certain types of food, and obviously you need to keep eating if you're doing an endurance event. Or certain foods might start to make you feel sick. And in that case, then you've got your standby foods, which are the sort of amber foods that you might have. And then of course, there's a list of things you don't really know don't work, and you don't want to be having them. So if you've got those in mind as well, and you track all these things, so if you come to an aid station, a drink station, or a feed station in an event, if it's implanted in your mind that you don't really want to be eating that particular thing, I don't know, it might be nuts or fruit, or fruit might mess up your stomach or whatever. There's many things. It reminds me actually a race I did, one of the first races I did in Europe, the Ciazinal mountain race. And there was tea at the aid stations, but I didn't really speak very good French, and I thought, that looks like it says tea, but surely they don't have cups of tea halfway around a race in the middle of summer. And I had one because I was intrigued, and it was tea, which wasn't really what I wanted when I was sweating buckets and struggling at 6,000 feet, 2,000 meters in the Swiss Alps in the scorching hot temperatures. But anyway, I know I might put that on my list of things to avoid if I were to do that again. Here's the summary of what we've talked about. Nutrition, like all aspects of training, is very individual, so you need to make it individual to yourself. Your urge to eat, your hunger and your thirst, and your preferred foods can change with the weather conditions. So what might work for you in the summer might not work for you in the winter. To get maximum rewards from your training, you need to fuel it appropriately. Underfueling carries a lot more risk than overfueling. So if you're a little bit overweight, it's better than being a little bit underweight. In fact, probably being 3 kilos overweight is better than being 1 kilo underweight. So just make sure you're eating enough. That's really the most important thing. Make sure you're fueling your training adequately and your events adequately. If you track your own weight and your own consumption, you can learn what works for you. We like MyFitnessPal and just getting weighed once a week, but there are lots of other trackers around. It can be a real pain to track your food intake, your nutrition all the time, so the best way to do it is to just do spot checks now and again, do a week or two every now and again, and just see whether things are on track. And make a list of foods that work for you, the ones that don't work for you, the ones you can use in training, the ones you want to use in your main events, and the things that you don't want to eat, the things that you want to avoid, and gradually improve things week on week, month on month, and year on year. I hope you found this useful. We could have a discussion in the community section if you like. I might start something there, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.